because it's a sorry situation when a company's trying to be the Rolex of whiskey and they're making Casio watches.
Yeah.
The Super Social Club, I'm Jeremy.
This is Whiskey in the Six, I'm Rob.
Welcome to the Whisky Rant podcast.
It's a little crusty.
It's frustrating.
And it's going to be a little bit of a rant.
I don't understand it. I don't know why.
Some sort of injustice.
Anyway, end rant.
Going back to your point, Ralfy, I think for us, you know, the way the whiskey market is these days, we've kind of switched our focus a little bit. I know I have for sure, but finding the more, you know, the better buy, the good value Scotch, because there's are lots still out there.
Absolutely.
For me, I just bought a couple bottles of the Air Intense. I really liked it, and a great price here in Canada for that bottle. Same with GlenAllachie 12. Love that bottle, and a great price again. What would you recommend as, you know, what's a good value purchase right now? If someone's looking for something good value for money, what's your recommendation?
My recommendation is go to online Scotch Whisky Awards, oswa.com. That's my first primary recommendation, because you're not just getting my recommendation, you're getting a very articulate and well-informed consensus from the online whiskey community, and many video commentators are contributing, including you guys. And it's now that the actual awards ceremony from last year has now had over 40,000 views.
Great.
And I can tell you right now that small distilleries in Scotland who do not have the marketing reach, who tend to be well down the pecking order of status within the industry, really appreciate the fact that, sure, the onliners can be a little bit pesky at times and a little bit opinionated at times, but our heart's definitely in the right place, and the authenticity of our content is definitely holding the attention in such a way that any small distillery, and we're starting in Scotland, but it really applies globally, any small distillery which is seen visibly to be doing it right and to be spending the money the right way and investing in the right way and doing their level best is going to get attention. And nothing proves that more than Iron Root Distillery in Texas and their bourbon, which won International Bourbon of the Year award from such a small distillery. Why? Simple, because the guys that run it are proper, authentic, true enthusiasts who really know their business and have comprehensively connected with the online whiskey community, who have provided them invaluable insight into how to make good whiskey. If you want to find experts these days, you don't go to the whiskey industry. Sure, they are there. But the guys that are happy to talk are your proper anorak online enthusiasts who know considerably more than they're credited with.
That's very true.
Yeah, I mean, you look at whiskey reps who essentially have a sales job. Yeah. I mean, you're not going to get a legit opinion from them because they're there to sell a product. Yeah. What you want to do is go see Ralfy.com.
That's right.
And get a legit, honest opinion with someone super experienced.
Yeah, you don't want a person that was trained in PR to influence you in buying a whiskey, because unfortunately, and it's no disrespect to them, but it's, you know, they're promoting a brand, so they are not going to say a negative thing about that whiskey. But you go to the true source, which is the consumer, and you'll find a lot of them on Aquavite's lives weekly. You know, there's 300 people you could pick their brain, and all of those guys know probably more than any PR guy, or well, majority of the PR guys across the world when it comes to whiskey, right? So
I'll share something with you that you will not hear anywhere else. A major whiskey company actually employed a professional actor to act as a tutor to educate their whiskey ambassadors.
Unbelievable. That's I believe it, but I'm at a loss, because
I'm not condemning it, by the way, because I can see where they're coming from. Sure. They want a constant and consistent message which they can control. Mm-hmm. And an actor is there to deliver the lines. Simple as that.
Yeah, and I think that's That's essentially, I mean, I've made jokes about it in the past, but to not be derogatory, I think that's the best comparison, is an actor to, you know, an ambassador, because essentially that's their job, is to act out the role of an enthusiast of that whiskey.
Sure.
And they may not be, you know, I know some that are probably not big fans of the product that they represent.
Yeah.
They're big whiskey fans, but may not actually truly enjoy the one that they're, you know,
Sure. When
servicing.
they go home at night, they reach under the cupboard and pull out the
Exactly.
stuff they're really interested in.
Exactly.
Sure.
Right. So
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I have to say, I do criticize marketing, but I would never criticize a specific brand ambassador for anything, because they've got a tough and difficult job. Now, superficially, it looks glamorous. You're going around a region, you're maybe going around the world, you're standing in a hotel room somewhere in a function suite, and all the whiskies are poured out, and you're giving the speech, and you're giving the talk about the glens and the bends and the culture and the history and the purity of the water and all the usual predictable stuff. But generally, the people they are speaking to are indifferent, passive consumers who are there because they want some cheap or free whiskey, and they also want to be entertained. And in amongst these people, you will always find someone who, when they're sober, is an asshole, but when they're pished, is a complete and total asshole. And who wants to be standing there trying to be a representative for your employer, trying to keep things tactful and dignified and keep the atmosphere calm in the room, when you never know what kind of dipshit you could have end up sitting in the room at the table, knocking back and slagging this off and that off, and interrupting and kicking in, every time they feel the need for more of an audience. So a brand ambassador's gig is not a happy one at the end of the day. And when they're out and about, away from their families, away from their base, all the time zone changes, their constant companion is alcohol. And many, and I know this, are so tempted night after night, whiskey, whiskey, whiskey. They've got it virtually free. They've got the glass in front of them. It can be a little bit addictive because it is an addictive substance.
absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. And I've mentioned before that it's it's a lonely job. As much as it, like Ralfy says, it looks glamorous. A lot of these guys, they're away from their family all the time. If they were able to have a family,
sure,
depending on how long they've been at the job, or they lose their family.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of brand ambassadors that end up being divorced or it impacts their family greatly. So that is a great point. They do have a tough job. Being a representative of a brand is a tough job as a whole, because you're gonna face something that you don't like,
sure.
And he brought Ralfy said incredible things. I haven't even thought of the fact that you're dealing with jerks like quite a bit. You're dealing with alcohol. That means you're dealing with some jerks. There's gonna be jerks in the room. You know what I mean? So
Ralfy, last time we spoke, we asked you if you were excited to go back to whiskey shows and whiskey festivals, and you said no. Has your opinion changed at all about that now that the pandemic seems to be getting to a point where stuff is opening up again and whiskey festivals are coming back?
Whiskey festivals are coming back, but they never quite went away because they morphed online, which is why Zoom became such a feature. And at that point, 2 years ago, distilleries suddenly discovered the medium that they'd been overlooking because, frankly, they didn't, in my opinion, really want to connect with it. But they had no choice because they had to get their brands out there. And that was the online. They had to become their own social media. Some took up to it with ease, and some have been clearly very nervous about it. And I have to say, rather wooden and awkward. And I find it fascinating to observe how it's the small distilleries where the multitasking brand ambassador who actually operates stills, who actually goes in and checks casks and warehouse, who actually goes and helps when the tractor comes in to collect the draff and has a chat with a farmer and maybe gives them a wee dram of whiskey and finds out the local gossip and can talk about these things in front of an audience who are there not for a very big, high profile, generic consumer orientated brand, but for the customer brandings. Like, for example, a good example, Arran, Isle of Arran Distillery. You know, you look at the whole range. I can't think of any other distillery that is quite so articulate throughout the entire range of what they produce, while still keeping most of their whiskies relatively affordable. The consistency in batches between the 10-year-old is highly commendable. And along with them, you've got Glencadam, and their 10-year-old, absolutely superb. I need these distilleries to be there to give me stuff to talk about that keeps my content real and legitimate. Whether it be, I mean, I can hardly buy a bottle of Springbank now. The last time I got my hands on a bottle of Kilkerran, I had to buy it from Denmark.
Yeah,
That's great. And the fact that you live in Scotland and that's the case is terrifying, because we're finding it more and more difficult to buy Springbank, and it's become absurd to the point where, well, and I think GlenAllachie is headed down that road, unfortunately, as well. Thanks to the big name behind it. You know, it seems that ever since they won that award in, what was it, 2020?
it was a batch 4 of
Batch 4.
10-year-old cash strain.
It skyrocketed. And I started enjoying them just before that, in all honesty, probably with the batch 3. And then I had the 12 and the 18 before the 15 came out. And as soon as they won the award for the batch 4 10-year-old, I feel like they're almost, I mean, they're not Springbank yet, but they might end up being that way. As far as
GlenAllachie are not Springbank yet, for a very simple reason. As soon as Billy Walker took over that distillery with hundreds of millions of pounds, he could go out round the world, literally round the world, with all his contacts and all his experience and get the best of the best casks.
Yeah.
He could ship them over wet before the pandemic kicked in and transportation became horrendously expensive. His timing has been pitch perfect. There's a lot of luck involved. But bear in mind that what GlenAllachie are bottling at the moment are the spirit legacy of the previous owners who were producing as blend fill. Now, I know for a fact, having been up to that distillery a few years ago, they have really cleaned it out. They have got big plans for longer fermentations, slower distillery runs, and you will see the absolute transformation of GlenAllachie as a signature from what it was before. And it begs the question, it really does, if Billy Walker or Springbank took over Bowmore Distillery, just what could they achieve?
Yeah.
Or Lagavulin, my goodness, they'd send it into the stratosphere.
Absolutely. Speaking to Bulmar, because I just acquired the 21-year-old Aston Martin. When Bulmar wants to, I mean, have you tried it yet, Ralfie?
Absolutely wouldn't touch it with a barge pole. No chance. No chance. You've got to be kidding me. There's the Aston Martin. Oh, it's a big, high prestige mark. Look at it, and they've got the logo on it. How much do you think Bowmore have paid for that? Why don't they just make good quality 10-year-old Bowmore, 12-year-old Bowmore, 15-year-old Bowmore, and take out the fake tan and actually invest in their basic products? Because it's a sorry situation when a company's trying to be the Rolex of whiskey and they're making Casio watches.
Yeah. That's a great point. Honestly, though, I will say what rarely ever happens to me is I will be sent a sample and feel the need to buy that bottle. I was sent a sample of the Bowmore 21-year-old and immediately I actually sought out a bottle. And the reason for that is when I was tasting it, I was messaging a friend, and I'm like, there has to be older whiskey in this. There has to be. And I didn't know anything about it at the time. And I had the same exact stance that you had, to be honest with you. I wasn't expecting much. I thought it was just going to be another Bowmore, flash in the pan, gimmicky kind of whiskey. But it gave me that old whiskey flavor that I love and that I always seek out when I'm purchasing an older whiskey. And I did some digging, and a friend of mine helped me out with it. And apparently there's 39%, 35 plus year old whiskey in that. So go ahead.
And there you have it. The Bowmore clearly want to make a big impression because of the connection with a high profile car producer. And that sort of whiskey is going to sell in Dubai Airport, Hong Kong Airport, Berlin Airport, and Los Angeles Airport. That's where you'll find it. Mm-hmm. It's aimed at a consumer who is quite possibly an oligarch, who wants nothing but the finest and rarest of Johnny Walker George V on his gold-plated table in his mini bar that pops out the wall when the sun's going down somewhere in the Mediterranean. So, that sort of bottle of whiskey is going to be sitting beside your finest of Moët Hennessy, Mort Hennessy, the finest of Armagnacs, the most exclusive of Chateau Rothschilds and Chateau de Chems. Yeah. That's in that league. And when people are in that sort of niche, they are very, very entitled and demanding. So you cannot fob them off with a standard 21-year-old Bowmore, which would be some wishy-washy washout, particularly if bottled at 40%.
Yeah, I think for me, the last time I purchased a Bowmore, it was the 18-year-old, probably 7 or 8 years ago, when the LCBO had it for a very reasonable $120 Canadian.
Yeah.
And it was decent whiskey, even at 43 or whatever percent it was.
Yeah.
It wasn't bad, and it was good value, and I thought it was good whiskey. And since then, I really haven't purchased a Bowmore because I don't think that they really are producing that good of stuff. And the Lamb was good.
The Lamb good.
Right, those kind of one-off special editions. The 15-year-old that was
the Devil's Casks.
Devil's Casks would be decent if you could get it for a good price. But other than that, their core range has kind of been very average or below
lackluster.
Average, right?
Absolutely.
Very lackluster.
Yeah, lackluster. And I mean, Ralfy nailed it. They're attempting to be, I think they're attempting to cater to the same people that Macallan are attempting to cater to. Right. So maybe it's a little more difficult for them because of their Isla roots in appealing to those types of people, because I think if you're a peated whiskey fan, you're already more of a whiskey fan than the average. Right. So to be appealing to the Macallan group is going to be very difficult for Bowmore. So it would be nice if a Billy Walker did take over a Bowmore, because you would see a drastic.
Overall. We hear so much stuff about old Bowmores, right? Like stuff from the 70s and 80s and how amazing it was and how that distillery is just not producing anywhere near of what they used to. I mean, I guess that's a large division.
Of course, yeah.
But to have your profile change that much, it seems a little disappointing.
Yeah, I can give you an explanation, guys, in that you're really looking at the trend amongst the corporate multinationals who own Scotch whisky distilleries, and they're on the stock market. And one of the worst days of the year for the board of directors is when they're sitting in front of the shareholders, many of whom are hedge funds and institutions, and they're getting harangued as to why the dividend for the year is down 1% and why the share price is down 5, 6, 10, 15%, and why they're not providing the returns that they did in the previous years. And when you are a liquor maker and you're making a consistent, cheap vodka, and all you have to do is brand it up with a fancy label and a fancy bottle and get some profile people to advertise it, and you're absolutely made. The profit ratio, the profit to production ratio for that vodka is very, very high. Quite literally, you can go to a neutral spirit maker in the UK and buy a litre of neutral spirit, full strength, for about £1.50.
Oh, wow.
£1.50, $3.
That's insane.
That's how cheap it is to make vodka. Now, gin, the only difference between gin and vodka is the extra cost of a few botanicals. Whether they happen to be quality botanicals or inferior botanicals, it just doesn't matter. Some distilleries will certainly, or some brands will certainly invest more in the flavour, like, for example, Tanqueray Old Number 10, which is a favourite of mine, excellent gin. But by and large, the majority of distilled spirits sold are relatively cheaply produced, and particularly when sold in bars, make enormous profits. So it's easy for the board of directors to meet their targets. But with Scotch whisky, you've got a problem. Mm-hmm. You don't even have this problem with rum or even with bourbon, but you've got it with Scotch whisky. You produce it, and then nothing happens for 3 years except you lose a proportion of what you've made. It's one of the most costly spirits to produce because it's put in because it comes out of pot still, which is high energy costs, high maintenance, high upkeep, lots of wear and tear in the copper. Guys, have you seen the price of copper recently? It's shocking, absolutely astronomical, and it's going to get higher. So the costs of producing whiskey and then having it wait in casks for all that period of time, they cannot get the margins that they really need as big corporations, and with the volume of sales that they require, which the small boutique independent distiller doesn't have to care about. If they can shift 10,000 bottles in several months, they're doing just fine and dandy. And with the global demand for better quality Scotch whisky, if they have a decent contract with a distributor, they're home and dry. So I do have some sympathy for the big producers because they have to cover all the bases, and then pests and nuisances like you and I come along and we disrupt their expensive message with our pesky, frustrating, unsanctioned, unqualified opinions, which people happen to be listening to and find entertaining, informative, and very, very helpful when they're buying stuff.
Yeah, and even more so nowadays with the costs being the way they are, you can't afford to buy a bottle you're not going to enjoy. And you really do need to make sound decisions and get other people's opinions that you trust ahead of time.
Yeah, and speaking of being able to afford newer expressions and stuff like that, I do have a question. Are you engaged at all in any of the, like, do you believe in like flipping for a little bit of a profit to help like pay for future whiskey purchasing? Like, you know, you flip one bottle, pays for the next 3 bottles that you buy or whatever. Have you engaged in any of that? Are you involved in some auctioning or flipping?
Yes. But what I do is very modest. Bear in mind, I started buying whiskey back in the 1990s. Seriously. I would take trips up in the car on a Saturday, perfect day out, early morning up Loch Lomond side round to Inverary, and I'd go into Inverary Vaults, Inverary Whisky Shop, and when the proprietor was a Richard Joynson, quite a character, and he had 2 staff there. But it was just fantastic because I'd time it before the buses arrived with the Scandinavian tourists who just loved to get in and just because it was just a Scottish thing. But in between bus trips, I'd nip in, have a good chat, get a few wee samples because they were quite happy to say, you know, try this, try this, try this. And of course, the whole walls were just lined up with Springbanks. And that's when I started. I mean, I saw the writing on the wall here, guys, from my position, even back then. and I started buying up Springbanks, and I've got about 300 or 400.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, at one point, I had 2,500 bottles of whiskey.
Wow.
I was tripping over them, and frankly, they were a fire hazard. And I had to sell some of them. So I sold about 500, but I sold about 1,000 bottles. And I mean, I'm not one for big cars. I'm not one for fancy holidays. So I went out and I bought some barrels of whiskey.
Wow.
And I bought them young at their cheapest. And the thing is, when you buy young, you get your taste after 3 years and you say, right, this is the direction it's going. I'm going to give this, it's in a refill ex-bourbon cask, second fill. Right, let's give this 18 years. That's the time frame I'm looking at.
Wow. And what are we
So,
at in that time?
I've got a few casks. I won't bore you with the details, guys, but I've got a few casks in a warehouse. And I will be bottling one of them, a Kulila, before too long. Because I had the need to sell the bottles, and you sell while the demand is there. And there's bottles which I was never going to open. I was never going to drink because the price had gone up so far that there was no point. Anyway, I'm opening a bottle every single week of the year for my reviews.
Yep.
So there's no point in me spending all that time opening bottles that I bought 10, 20 years ago. That's no use to anybody. I can do that now and again as a wee treat, and I have done with Rare Malt Selection St. Magdalene, for example, or a Brora now and again. And I maybe do it in the future with one or two of my Port Ellens. But, right in the early days when nobody was interested, I was one of these completely compulsive anoraks that I wasn't saving a single penny in the bank account. And I wasn't adding to the company pension. I was out buying bottles of whiskey. And do you know, see, at the end of the day, it's not even the money anymore. It's just the quality of the journey. It's provided a very unique situation which you simply couldn't plan, where I was in Glasgow Whisky Club for many years, just as whiskey was taking off. I know many small distilleries that will roll out the carpet should I give them a phone call for a visit. I do own a number of casks now, which I will get round to bottling, but only as and when they're ready. And I have this fantastic loyal audience online, which has been building steadily for the last 12 years. And for a YouTube, I mean, that really does make me a YouTube veteran in the scheme of things, because I've seen far bigger channels than me, like Equals 3, for example, come and go. They've been and gone. And there's other channels now, which I don't think they'll be able to last the pace. I mean, you saw with Casey Neistat, the sheer demands of producing at his production quality every day of the week. He was burning out. Whereas for me, I sit in the bothy, press go, record, press stop, upload, and you're away. Bloopers and all.
I remember watching old Ralfy Collection videos and seeing a little glimpse into your little closets and your collection. And those are worthwhile rewatching, I think, because I think we would have another appreciation for what you had in there now. When we first watched those when they first came out, we maybe didn't know every bottle, but now we would probably recognize almost all of them.
Perhaps the Whisky Rant one day can do a Ralfy Collection video live in action in Scotland one day. On the Isle, at the Irish Sea, on the Isle, man.
You're asking a lot about that.
It's something I've got planned myself for my Patreon supporters, who are absolutely fantastic in the loyalty and the quality of the comments and interaction. Really, really civilized and very cosmopolitan.
Yeah.
And of course, for the Patreon subscribers, just buy Ralfy a wee dram a month. And get additional video every week, something totally different. And we've got my little cask of Glenfarclas on the go. We've got the unique bottling, the infinity bottle type thing on the go. We've got several now, got a peated one. We've got the gallon jars of, say, Kulila or Lagavulin, which were bought 10, 15 years ago and just jarred up like an Armagnac and left to get on with it. And I have to say, my feedback is that the most spectacular improvement in a glass demijohn has been with rye. The rye loses none of its flavor because it's such a powerful profile because of the grain, but it really irons itself out and becomes enormously articulate over time in glass with a bit of air.
Interesting. So this particular rye that you're looking at right here is one of 154 bottles. It's the cast strength 18-year-old lot 40.
Right, completely unavailable where I am.
Yeah.
And
Even here.
that looks, by the way, that looks absolutely fabulous.
Yeah, it's honestly, I think it's fantastic, to be honest with you.
It's very, very good. And you're right about the rye. Like, this has not calmed down for 18 years. I mean, this thing is still delivering just as much as the 12-year-old did. Yeah,
it's very rye spicy. If that's a word or a terminology I could use, but I personally love it. It does have a little bit more age in my, like, it tastes older than the 12 in my opinion. It would be nice to do a side-by-side, which we will be doing eventually, but really good stuff. Unfortunately, it was pretty much unavailable here as well. Only 54 bottles, and it was all lottoed to purchase. And I was lucky enough that a subscriber of mine won it and didn't want to purchase it. So he allowed me to purchase it instead, which was nice. And then Jeremy actually won himself.
Yeah, I finally got lucky in an online whiskey draw. Usually I don't, but I did get a bottle of this. And yeah, I mean, like, we're big fans of Lot 40 cast strength. And it's nice to see one of the bigger distilleries coming out with something that we'd be interested in.
Yeah.
And like we said before, there's so much good Canadian whiskey out there, and the big guys aren't producing it or bottling it like this. They're not putting the statement at cast strength. And they can. They could easily do it. Crown Royal could do it.
Well, we know Alberta Distillery could do it because they're sending all of their high quality stuff to the States being bottled as Whistle Pig.
Sure. Right?
So
yeah, and Canadians do deserve more whiskey like this.
Yeah.
Do you want me to answer that question for you?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
International commercial politics. You've got these big companies producing world-class liquor, and they're producing 150 bottles, and then you've got to go into the lottery and see if you're lucky enough to get to buy a bottle.
Yeah.
What the hell do they think they're playing at?
Exactly.
When they have got vast stocks of this stuff.
Yeah.
And this is nonsense. A big company, there's only 150 bottles. Bullshit. If they wanted, they could have 1,500 bottles and nobody queuing up to be lucky enough to be winning the draw to get a bottle.
Yeah.
They're flying in the face of commercial expediency, as are most Canadian distillers. And you've got to ask yourself, what's actually going on behind the scenes? Is there some sort of written code that whiskey made in Canada has to keep itself out the mainstream, keep itself unavailable, and every now and again just pop out some tiny little droplet for the adoring fans that are prepared to queue up and put themselves through the ringer for it?
Yeah, it's tremendously unfortunate. And what's mind-blowing is a company like Lot 40, who probably, I mean, Lot 40 and Alberta Distillers probably have the best rye in the country at the moment. And Lot 40, you don't see it at all. And the reason is Corby's is in control.
Right.
And they're like knocking on the door. Well, they'll never beat Diageo, but they want to be. And they don't allow us to produce or distribute, or they don't allow Lot 40 to do it anyway. And I've spoken to the master distiller many times, and I know you can just see he wishes he could put out way more than he does.
Yeah.
So what you're telling me, Roy, what you're telling me is that Corby's, the owners of that distillery, want to be as big as Diageo by not selling their product.
That doesn't make sense, right?
Well, it does make actually sense. It does make sense when you look at it from a different direction.
That's right.
And what you're looking is industrial self-censorship imposed on Canadian distillers by outside forces. You're talking about post-colonialism.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, all you're doing with this release is frustrating thousands of people.
that's right.
Because like now it becomes this like elitist thing where only a certain amount of people have it, and it's like it's an 18-year-old age statement of one of the best ryes in Canada that no one can get.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, possibly the best rye that company has ever put out.
Like, why not do a 15-year-old batch with multiple casks that you could put out, a couple thousand bottles, like the 5,000 bottles they did of the 12-year-old.
I find it tremendously hard to believe that they don't have hundreds of 18-year-old casks.
I mean, maybe right? They only have one.
How? Okay, I know they produce a lot of the Lot 40, which is probably around 4 or 5 years old.
Right.
You know what I mean? So the regular Lot 40, 43%, they produce a lot of it. It's global, obviously. Ralfy can get a bottle of it.
Yeah.
It's being produced and distributed around the world. So that eats up what's available at 18 years old because it's being used up at 4 or 5 years old.
Yeah.
But you're telling me they're not making enough of it and saying, okay, let's put aside 10% each year of the 20,000 barrels that we barrel each year. I mean, maybe it's not 20,000. But you know what I'm saying. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Jeremy, I've got a question for you.
Sure.
So there's a business in Canada and they're looking at this situation saying, right, Canada makes world-class, superb, highly sought after rye whiskey. Let's start a distillery then. Let's open up our own small distillery like Macaloni's over on the West Coast. Let me ask you, as a Canadian, what kind of support, tax breaks, incentive and grants will that distillery get for all the skilled jobs that they're going to create for the economy?
That's a great question, right? Then where is the incentive, especially in a province where we are in Ontario, and having to sell through the government stores? It's a huge amount of red tape that people have to go through. It's like you have to battle for shelf space. People don't do it.
No,
because it's too much of a headache.
It's too much. It's the cost just doesn't. There's a reason why we're paying $123 at the LCBO for a 1-year-old single malt,
Right.
And it's not because they want to put it out at that price. They know their competitors in that price range are between 12 and 18 years old. So they don't want to do that. There's no way they want to do that.
Yeah. Right.
What you're experiencing there is a high degree of social censorship.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Economic censorship.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you were going to do it in any province, I think the best province to do it in would be Alberta, because their taxes are the least in Canada.
They don't have a control board that restricts sales of alcohol.
Yeah. Now the problem with Alberta is you don't have unless you have a heated warehouse, you don't have the climate where it's the best conditions to produce whiskey.
And you don't have the population for the market, right? Like Ontario is the market for whiskey because we're the biggest.
Right. But I mean, at least in Vancouver and in BC as a whole, you have a relatively warm climate. Actually, like throughout the calendar year, probably warmer than Scotland, right? Throughout the calendar year. So that's just BC. Now you're looking at the far east side. You have Nova Scotia. It gets cold, but it's always kind of like plus, low pluses. So you're still getting some aging throughout the year. Whereas in Ontario and especially in Alberta, it's cold. Like you get snow in July in Alberta sometimes.
Right, yeah.
So, I mean, cost wise, it unfortunately doesn't make sense for a lot of places unless you have a heated warehouse, I think.
Or subterranean.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and researching this Caledonian stuff, you had to have 237 investors to get this distillery off the ground.
Wow.
Right? Like people were chipping in from all over the place to get this thing going for him. And he brings a lot of experience. And this whiskey, I mean, if you're getting this at 1 year, and I think it's pretty solid.
It's great at 1 year.
I mean, this could be great. This could be one of Canada's best distilleries.
It's showing incredible potential, and honestly, I think a lot of people that drank that blind would put that in a much older category, right? Currently, Shelter Point and Two Brewers are able to. I mean, but the problem is they can provide Canada with these whiskeys, but do they have? They don't have enough. Shelter Point will be our best hope of being exposed globally because they have a fair amount of funding behind them, and they're producing at a relatively large rate compared to the rest of Canada for sure. So I think that's our best hope. Two Brewers they're not producing enough that we can share globally.
I think it's like Canada is looking good as far as what we're getting now, but we could be doing so much more.
Absolutely. And if any of these heated warehouses decided to just produce rye,
yeah.
I think that's where a lot of Canadian distilleries really shine, is their rye production.
You're talking about provenance, the circumspect nature of location and what it delivers to spirit. And when you look at Macaloni's and the number of awards they have won, in particular, what's most notable is to be the world's best new make spirit in the International Wines and Spirits Award. I believe it's that one. Don't know for sure. If I'm misquoting, just let me know.
No,
but to get that sort of award shows you the quality, capacity of Canadian distilleries. And even now, we've seen nothing, absolutely nothing with Canadian peat in it.
Yeah. Great point.
Nothing.
We have an abundance of peat in this country.
Yeah. I mean, Shelter Point stabs at it a little bit, but they're afraid of it. I think they're afraid of their own peat. They don't feel like it produces the tastes and smells that they're looking for.
Well, just tell them from Ralfy not to be worried, not to overanalyze, just bloody well go on with it and see what they get and roll with it.
Absolutely. I agree.
Of provenance. Peat varies considerably, even in Scotland. When you go to different locations and gather the peat on Islay, at Cumbernauld, just outside of Glasgow, up in the northwest and northeast Highlands, and down in the borders, and when you burn the peat, you get a different coloured ash residue because of a direct result of the individual environmental impact on the peat, which affects the smell as it's burning. And in Canada, you're going to have an enormous range of peat profiles and peat flavours because of the enormous geographical range that is Canada as a nation.
Yeah.
I mean, you're spanning thousands and thousands of miles. You look at Scotland, you're about 80 miles coast to coast?
Yeah, we could fit a lot of Scotlands in Canada.
Oh yeah, in Ontario.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, we'll end it here, and then.
You happy with that?
Yeah, that was fantastic. That was fantastic. That was good.